Thank you, Eric. Will you please pray with me? Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations upon all of our hearts be worthy in your sight and in keeping with the teachings of your Son, Jesus Christ, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Growing up with the internet has been difficult for many people of my age and younger. The internet is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, the internet has allowed us to be connected in greater ways with people from all around the world than ever before in history. We can exchange ideas and see that we are not so different. On the other hand, the internet allows us to see things that we would never want to see. As people who live in a prosperous country, the internet lets us see some of the horrors of the world and even forces those horrors upon us. Talk to millennials or Gen Zers if they're old enough and ask if they've literally seen someone die or the results of a death on the internet. And chances are they might have. The internet allows us unfiltered access to these types of things. Most recently is horrifying images and videos coming out of Ukraine, of Israel and Gaza. Destruction and death on scales that our country has not seen since it appeared on our TV screens on September 11th, over 20 years ago. I don't seek out these videos, but when I come across them, I resist the urge to turn away. Not because I enjoy them, but because it feels wrong to be able to ignore what other people can't. To the people that live through these wars, these are not sights that they can just turn away from. These sights are their reality, their lives. To be able to turn away from them is, in a sense, ignoring their lived experiences. For those of you who have experienced loss in your own lives, you may have experienced something like that on a more minor scale. Perhaps as people you knew greeted you at the funeral of a loved one, they've said some hurtful things or couldn't look you in the eye. Maybe some of you have been told that this is all a part of God's plan. This is meant to be a statement of comfort from people who don't know what to say. It's natural to be uncomfortable around death. It makes us uneasy and forces us to confront our own fears and anxieties surrounding it. But instead of sharing in that pain, the person wants to push it away. But those who are mourning, who are hurt, who are suffering, rarely need pick-me-ups. They need someone who will look them in the eyes and share in their pain, to know that they are not alone in it, to understand them and be with them on their level. Look to when Jesus heals people. Most of the time, it's not far away with a prayer. When Jesus heals someone, it's not in the temple, proclaiming God's healing power from afar. Most of the time, Jesus is right there in the thick of it. He's there with the person who is in pain and need right at their eye level. He is present with them in their pain and their grief. He touches them. He lays hands on them. And he's not clinical about it either. He uses dirt. He uses spit to heal. He's with these people in ways that would be uncomfortable to most of us. But Jesus shows us that is the way to heal others in grief. Now, it might be tempting to turn away from this idea and focus on ourselves. After all, we all have hurts and traumas that we're suffering from, that we're learning to deal with, and just trying to live our lives. It sounds exhausting to bear someone else's pain while dealing with our own. After all, we need to bandage ourselves before we can help others. And that is true, but it's not an excuse to ignore others' pain and grief. In fact, through his actions, it seems that Jesus is telling us that our own wounds make us all the more able to be present with others. Let us look to our reading from the Gospel of John, where Jesus finally arrives at the gravesite of his friend Lazarus. Jesus sees the tomb of his friend. He sees Mary crying and the others with her, and he's so moved he weeps. This is such a meaningful moment because it is God incarnate crying at death, moved by it. God experiences the grief and the anguish that comes from losing someone. He doesn't put that weight on others. He feels it. Jesus could have resurrected Lazarus without even going near the tomb. But being there, experiencing that pain, shows us that there is something deeply important to God to be present with those who are suffering. Notice that Jesus does not try to soothe the pain away by distracting from it. He doesn't bring up God's plan or resurrection. Mary herself is the one, or Martha, is the one who does that. Jesus is actively in the moment, wading through the pain with people. It's only after this that he resurrects Lazarus. He could have resurrected him earlier or from far away, but Jesus chose to be amidst the pain and mourning, and it shows us Jesus' love for those who mourn and tells us something about how to be with people who mourn. As Reverend Henry Nouwen puts it, nobody escapes being wounded. We are all wounded people. The main question is not how can we hide our wounds so we don't have to be embarrassed, but how can we put our woundedness in the service of others? When our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we have become wounded healers. Jesus is God's wounded healer. Through his wounds, we are healed. Jesus' suffering and death brought about joy and life, ironically. His humiliation brought about glory. His rejection brought about a community of love. As followers of Christ, we can also allow our wounds to bring healing to others. Jesus actively weeps with those who mourned. He knew that pain is a part of life, and even as God incarnate, chose to feel it because he knew that that is the way in which humans are healed from grief. We are not healed by ignoring our pain and pretending that we are better than it. We don't help others when we pretend that everything is fine and treating them with pity. Being with someone who mourns, being truly with them, taking the time to understand their pain and their loss with our own pain and loss. That is what Jesus himself shows. This isn't something that is just done once at a funeral either. Our own loss and grief reminds us that these things follow us throughout our lives. Healing doesn't come in a week, a month, a year. Our own wounds remind us to check on others who are hurting. Because our pain doesn't cease. It only grows more bearable. As St. Paul says to the Romans, weep with those who weep. This doesn't mean that we compare our situations and tell our own pain. It means that we sit with them, and through that, they know that they are cared for. There is a holiness in being present with those who mourn and experiencing that pain. Our world tells us to look away, to hide ourselves from the pain that others are experiencing. But Jesus refused to look away. He lived with it, he experienced it. Our call is to be the same wounded healer that Jesus was. Not by ignoring the pain, but by looking on and being with them and speaking for them when they have no one else. Amen.